The twin moons of Velmarist 9 hung like silent sentinels in the night sky, casting a cold, silver glow over the crystalline city below. In the highest spire of the imperial palace, Princess Soraya of the Tkari Empire lay awake, again. She turned onto her side, her eyes fixating on the ornate ceiling. Sleep had abandoned her weeks ago. The finest physicians of her kind had failed to diagnose her condition. No elixirs, no energy stabilizers, no ancient rituals had alleviated the emptiness, a hollowness clawing at her mind like a predator stalking its prey. A sharp chime disrupted the silence. The automated voice of her AI assistant, Civic, hummed softly through the chamber. "Your Highness, the Terran envoy has arrived." Soraya sat up, fingers curling into the silken sheets. The mere thought of allowing a human into her sanctum was unthinkable. Her people saw Terrans as primitive creatures, ruled by emotion rather than logic. And yet, she had exhausted every option. She had no choice. He entered like he owned the place. Broad-shouldered, dressed in an unadorned navy blue uniform, Commander Elias Vance was everything Soraya despised about his kind, too relaxed, too self-assured. His gaze, an intense shade of green, swept across the chamber before landing on her. "You look terrible." Soraya's golden eyes narrowed. "Is that how humans greet royalty?" Vance shrugged. "I'm not here to flatter you, Princess. I'm here to figure out why an alien monarch called in a human for a bedtime story." Her patience frayed. "I have not slept in 32 rotations. My mind is unraveling, and if my condition worsens, my people will deem me unfit to rule." Vance's cocky smirk faded. For the first time, his expression turned serious. "And you think a human can fix that?" Soraya exhaled, standing to her full height. "Terrans feel more than my kind. You embrace emotions where we suppress them. It is a weakness, but it is also," she hesitated, then admitted, "a necessity I seem to lack." Vance studied her, arms crossed. "You think this is some emotional deficiency?" She turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze. "I do not think, Commander. I know." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the low hum of the palace's security field. Then, Vance stepped forward. "Let's test your theory." Soraya blinked. "What?" "You said you feel empty. Let's see what happens if I stay close." It was absurd. Reckless. But desperation clawed at her pride. She gestured stiffly toward the seating area. "Do as you wish." Vance sat in the chair opposite her bed, stretching out like he belonged there. Soraya hesitated, then lay back down, her heart pounding harder than it should. She closed her eyes. Minutes passed. Then an hour. For the first time in weeks, her thoughts quieted. The ever-present gnawing sensation, the one that had kept her teetering between wakefulness and madness, began to recede. Her breathing slowed. Her muscles, once locked in a constant state of tension, softened. A warmth spread through her chest. Not physical, but something deeper. Something ancient, familiar, yet utterly foreign. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping before she could stop it. "Stay." She didn't see his reaction. Her body had already surrendered to the sleep that had eluded her for so long. But Vance remained still, watching her with an unreadable expression. He hadn't moved, and yet, he felt the shift. He just didn't know what it meant yet. The scent of burning incense and charged ozone filled the chamber as Soraya woke with a sharp inhale. The warmth of sleep still clung to her, but something felt different. She had slept. For the first time in over a month, her body had yielded to unconsciousness. The ever-present pressure behind her temples was gone, the hollow ache in her chest no longer gnawed at her insides. She turned her head slightly, golden eyes adjusting to the dim blue light of her quarters. Vance was still there. He sat slouched in the chair, arms folded, legs stretched out, his breathing even and slow. His uniform was slightly rumpled, a clear indicator that he hadn't moved for hours. Soraya's gaze lingered on him longer than it should have. Why did his presence ease her torment? It made no logical sense. The Tkari prided themselves on absolute control, the suppression of base instincts and emotional dependencies, and yet her body reacted to him as if he were an anchor in the void. Her fingers clenched around the sheet. This was a problem. A dangerous one. She forced herself to sit up, the rustling fabric breaking the silence. Vance stirred, exhaling sharply as his eyes fluttered open. His gaze, still clouded with sleep, found hers immediately. "You're awake," he muttered, rubbing a hand down his face. "So are you," she countered. Vance let out a low chuckle. "Yeah, well, sleeping in a chair isn't exactly comfortable." He stretched, joints popping in protest. "How do you feel?" Soraya hesitated. Admitting weakness was not in her nature. But denying the truth when it was so blatantly obvious would be foolish. "Better." The word tasted strange on her tongue. Vance smirked. "You're welcome." She stiffened. "I did not thank you." "No, but you should." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So, are we gonna talk about the fact that I seem to be your personal sleep aid?" Soraya's jaw tightened. "It is unexplainable." "It's not, though." His expression shifted, the teasing edge giving way to something more thoughtful. "Your people suppress emotions, right? Maybe your body is rebelling against that." She scoffed. "That is an oversimplification of centuries of Tkari evolution. Or maybe it's the truth you don't want to hear." Soraya's fingers twitched against the sheets. "You assume much, Commander." Vance exhaled through his nose, leaning back again. "Look, all I know is that you passed out the moment I stuck around. Coincidence? I don't think so. Maybe, just maybe, your people aren't as biologically above emotions as you like to believe." Soraya stood, smoothing the fabric of her gown, ignoring the slight unease in her chest. "That is irrelevant. I am heir to the Empire. I will not become dependent on an off-worlder." Vance let out a low whistle. "And yet, here we are." She turned sharply, glaring down at him. "Do not mistake necessity for attachment, Commander." His smirk returned, but there was something calculating behind his eyes. "Right. And what happens when your people find out about this necessity?" Soraya froze. "The Tkari Council. If they learned she required a human's presence to function, to sleep, it would be seen as a fundamental weakness. Her right to rule would be called into question. She would be removed from the succession, stripped of her title, cast aside as an anomaly, or worse, a liability." She turned away, her voice quieter. "They must not know." Vance tilted his head. "So, what's the plan? You keep me locked up in here every night like some kind of royal pet?" She tensed. "You will speak with more respect, Terran." He chuckled, standing. "Relax, princess. I'm just trying to figure out what you want from me." Soraya turned to face him fully, something in her chest tightening. What did she want? She had summoned him in desperation, assuming his presence would be another failed attempt at a cure. But now? Now, she was faced with something infinitely more dangerous than sleeplessness. She needed him. Not as an advisor. Not as an officer. As a presence. As a force that settled the storm within her. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "You will stay." Vance's brow lifted slightly. "Every night?" Soraya swallowed her pride. "Yes." He exhaled, studying her for a long moment before nodding. "All right." A part of her relaxed, though she didn't know why. This was a temporary solution. Nothing more. Nothing less. But when Vance gave her that knowing look that said he understood more than she wanted him to, Soraya knew she had made a deal with something far more dangerous than a sleepless night. She had made a deal with a human. And humans were unpredictable. The heavy silence of the chamber was broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the palace's shielding systems. Beyond the reinforced glass windows, the city of Velmaris 9 shimmered in the distance, its crystalline structures glowing like captured starlight. But inside the royal suite, the air felt different, charged, taut with something unspoken. Soraya stood near the window, arms folded behind her back, her golden eyes staring into the endless night. She had never felt more exposed. Vance was behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know, she could feel him. It was a discomforting realization. Her body, her mind, had begun to anticipate his presence. And now, she could not ignore the truth clawing its way into her thoughts. This was no longer just a remedy for her sleeplessness. It was a dependency. Are you going to keep staring out the window, or are we actually going to talk about this? Vance's voice cut through the quiet, laced with that infuriating blend of amusement and curiosity. Soraya's grip tightened. There is nothing to discuss? Right. So, you just summon me here every night for fun? She turned, her expression neutral, carefully constructed. You agreed to this arrangement? He exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head. Sure. But you haven't stopped pretending like it doesn't mean anything. Her stomach twisted. It does not. Vance stepped closer, the soft fabric of his uniform shifting against the air. He wasn't touching her, but he was near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Near enough that her heart betrayed her with a single, traitorous flutter. You keep telling yourself that, princess? His voice was low, almost teasing, but there was an edge to it, a challenge. Soraya's breath came slower, measured. You mistake necessity for desire, Commander. Vance tilted his head. And you mistake control for strength. The words struck deeper than they should have. She had spent her entire life mastering discipline, ruling her body, her emotions, her instincts. But this thing between them, was unraveling her in ways she could not fight. She turned away. You should leave? No. Soraya froze. Slowly, she looked back at him, her expression sharp. What did you say? Vance's gaze was steady, unwavering. I said no. He took another step forward, closing the space between them. You want me to leave? Say it like you mean it. The air grew thick between them, heavy with something dangerously close to collision. She should have ordered him out. Should have called for security. Should have ended this before it spiraled further out of control. But her voice failed her. Because deep down, she didn't want him to leave. Vance's voice softened, but his words carried weight. You don't have to do this alone, Soraya. Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. No title, no formality, just her. Soraya clenched her jaw. You presume too much. Do I? His gaze flickered over her face, searching. Then why do you keep looking at me like that? She inhaled sharply. Like what? Vance smirked. Like you're trying not to want something? The accusation sent fire through her veins. Her control, the rigid composure she had spent a lifetime perfecting, cracked. Before she could stop herself, she closed the remaining distance between them. She stood so close she could feel the warmth of his breath, could see the flecks of gold hidden in the green of his eyes. Vance didn't move. He let her get as close as she wanted, but he didn't reach for her. The choice was hers. Soraya's hands curled at her sides, tension winding tight inside her chest. This was dangerous. But he was right. She wanted something. Something she wasn't supposed to want. And that terrified her. At the last moment, she stepped back. Vance's smirk faded, but his eyes held no disappointment, only understanding. For the first time in her life, Soraya felt seen. But before she could process the moment, a sharp chime rang through the chamber. Civic's automated voice echoed. Alert! Tkari Council members inbound to your quarters. ETA. 1 minute. Soraya's breath caught. No. If they saw Vance here, alone in her chambers at this hour, it would mean political ruin. Her stomach clenched. She turned to Vance, urgency replacing everything else. You have to leave. Now. Vance's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Where? She moved swiftly, pressing a command into the control panel. A secret passageway hidden behind the ornate wall panels slid open. Vance raised an eyebrow. Of course you have a secret exit. Go, she urged. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The wall sealed behind him just as the chamber doors slid open. Soraya turned just in time to see 3 members of the High Council enter. Their eyes were cold, calculating. They knew something. And as they stepped further into her quarters, Soraya realized, they weren't here for a simple visit. They were here because they suspected her secret. And if they uncovered the truth, everything would come crashing down. The three counselors stood just inside Soraya's chambers, their robes of silver and black flowing with the deliberate precision of authority. Their gazes, cold and unyielding, swept over the room like predators searching for prey. Soraya did not move. She could not afford to. A single flicker of unease, a single misplaced glance toward the concealed passage where Vance was hidden, and it would be over. Counselor Valus, the eldest among them, stepped forward. His golden eyes narrowed, his hands clasped neatly before him. "Princess Soraya," he said, his voice like polished steel. "Forgive the intrusion, but pressing matters demand our attention." She inclined her head, keeping her voice steady. "Counselor, to what do I owe this unannounced visit?" Valus studied her for a long moment before tilting his head slightly. "A rather curious report has reached us." Soraya's pulse quickened, but her expression remained impassive. "Elaborate? It has come to our attention that you have developed unusual habits as of late." Her fingers curled at her sides. "Unusual in what way?" Valus exchanged a look with the other counselors before taking another measured step closer. "There have been reports that you are struggling with your health. That you are unwell." Soraya kept her chin high. "I assure you, my condition is stable. If there were any concerns, my physicians would have informed you." Counselor Reyes, a sharp-featured woman known for her ruthlessness, raised an eyebrow. "And yet, despite these assurances, we continue to hear whispers." She let the words settle, watching for a reaction. "Strange behaviors. Late-night activities. A certain dependency forming." Soraya's stomach twisted. They knew. Or at least, they suspected. "I do not indulge in rumors," she replied coolly. "Nor do I concern myself with the idle gossip of those who do." Counselor Auras, the youngest and most cunning, smiled faintly. "Of course. But given the delicate nature of your position, we must be thorough. After all, your people expect perfection from their future empress." A test. They were baiting her, searching for a weakness, for something that would confirm their suspicions. She would give them nothing. Soraya exhaled slowly, as if bored by their presence. "If this is the extent of your inquiry, I suggest you bring me something of actual importance next time." Auras' smile didn't waver, but his gaze flicked briefly around the chamber. "You are alone tonight?" Her muscles tightened. "As I always am." A pause. Then, Valus turned to Civic, her AI assistant. "Activate surveillance records for this chamber. Last 3 rotations." Soraya's breath stilled. "No." Civic's voice, cold and neutral, responded. "Access to Imperial quarters is restricted by royal command. Only the heir may grant." "Override?" The demand rang through the chamber like a death sentence. For the first time, Soraya felt her control slipping. If they accessed the surveillance logs, they would see Vance. Everything would be exposed. She had only seconds to decide. Think. Her fingers brushed against the concealed interface at her side. With a subtle movement, she pressed a hidden command into the controls. A faint pulse vibrated beneath her fingertip. Civic's voice crackled. "Surveillance logs have been corrupted. Data retrieval unsuccessful." Silence. Reyes's eyes darkened. "Convenient." Soraya lifted her chin. "Faulty security systems are hardly my concern. If you question my integrity, say it outright." Valus studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he stepped back. "For now, we will take our leave." But his tone made it clear. This was not over. The 3 counselors turned and strode toward the exit, their departure deliberate, calculated. The doors slid shut behind them, leaving Soraya standing in the center of the chamber, her heart pounding. For a long moment she did not move. Then, the hidden panel behind her shifted open, and Vance stepped out. "Well," he said dryly, "that was fun." Soraya whirled on him. "You should not be here." His gaze sharpened. "And yet, if I weren't, you'd be a hell of a lot closer to exile." Her lips parted, but no retort came. Because, he was right. She turned away, exhaling sharply. They will come back. They will not stop. Vance's voice was quieter this time. Then what's the move, princess? She closed her eyes for a brief moment before speaking. I have to make a choice. Vance stepped closer, his presence grounding her in ways she couldn't explain. What kind of choice? She met his gaze. To sever this connection and continue the life I was meant for. The unspoken alternative hung in the air between them. Or to risk everything. For him. For something deeper than duty. For something that made her feel alive. Vance's expression remained unreadable, but his voice was steady when he asked, "And what do you want, Soraya?" She swallowed, a war raging within her. Her entire existence had been built upon control, obedience, purpose. But for the first time, none of it felt like enough. And she didn't have an answer. Not yet. But soon. The door's security system beeped, a warning of another incoming presence. Soraya turned to Vance, voice urgent. You need to go. Now. He hesitated, searching her face for something, then gave a small nod. I'll be back. She didn't stop him. Didn't tell him he was wrong. Because deep down, she knew she wanted him to return. Even if it meant losing everything. As the doors shut behind him, Soraya closed her eyes and let out a breath. For the first time, she was afraid. Not of the council. Not of exile. But of what she might do next.